Friedrich Nietzsche was born in October of 1844. He was the son of a Lutheran minister, so the beginning of his life was very much influenced by religion. Unfortunately, his father died when he was very young, so his family moved, and it just consisted of his mom, his sister, his two aunts, and his maternal grandmother. Once he moved, he went to the finest preparatory school around, and then he moved on to another school called the Schulpforta. This is where he learned humanities, theology, and classical languages. After this, he attended the University of Bonn in 1864. Here he kind of shifted away from theology and pursued more philosophy and language during this time, and then also when he transferred again to the University of Leipzig in 1865, he published many essays on ancient works in academic journals. In 1869, he became the professor of Greek language and literature at the University of Basel, and this was incredible because he was only 24 years old at the time. Eventually, he joined the Prussian military because there was some fighting going on within this area of trying to determine whether Germany was going to be a united country or not. So he joined the military, but he had to leave very quickly because he got really sick from things like diphtheria and dysentery. Eventually, he got fed up with his job. They weren't really allowing him a lot of license to explore his philosophical thoughts. Anytime he published anything, he got a lot of backlash from the university. So he quit his job in 1879, and his health was rapidly declining from his sicknesses in the war. And after 1879, his health continued to deteriorate. He suffered some mental breakdowns, and his psyche was never the same. He was isolated from 1879 to 1889, and it was during this time that he wrote the majority of his works, but he never really got much notoriety for them until after he was dead. The last 11 years of his life, he had to be constantly taken care of. He was basically in a vegetative state. At first, he was taken care of at a asylum in Basel. Then his mother took over his care, and then when she died, his sister Elizabeth took over. So now we're going to transition to three of Nietzsche's main ideas. The first one, which is kind of the most crazy one that people always get up in arms about, was his statement that God is dead and that we as a people killed him. So when Nietzsche said this comes from his book, The Gay Science, that was published in 1882. And he was not meaning this as like an inflammatory statement. He wasn't being like, yay, atheism wins kind of thing. He actually was trying to get people to realize that because of the shift from religious thought to scientific thought, there was this hole that was beginning to be created where religion used to fill it in, where people were content to follow religion for their morals and their rules and their explanation for how the world works. And that was beginning to deteriorate, and he was trying to make people understand this. And once Germany became a unified nation, he saw people trying to fill this hole with nationalism, but he did not like nationalism and he did not think it was going to work. He really spoke about this in the work we're going to read later, The Parable of the Madman. Again, he said God is dead and we killed him. He's speaking of the implications of us turning away from God and turning towards science, and it leaving behind this hole that humanity then has to fill for themselves. The next topic that he talked about a lot was slave morality. And this kind of goes back to his time in the war. He discovered during the war that pain and hurt was necessary for the will to change. It was a necessary part of life. So during this time, he kind of had a really negative view of Christianity. He thought that it was a big pot of denial to make the weak feel better. One of his most famous quotes was, "The Christian faith from the beginning is the sacrifice of all freedom, all pride, all self-confidence of spirit. It is at the same time subjection, self-derision, and self-mutilation." He basically thought that Christianity had people that were Christians had weaknesses, and they created this mindset to kind of view their weaknesses as a good thing. So like, let's say you weren't kind of sexually attractive and you couldn't find someone to live with. That was kind of labeled as purity, or you couldn't rebel against the people that were higher than you, so that was deemed obedience, and those were good things that were to be strived for. And he thought this was overall just a very weak mindset to take. He did not agree with it at all, and thought it was really unfortunate that this is what a lot of Christianity kind of felt. And then from that, he really loved this idea of the Übermensch, or the Superman, and this idea of self-overcoming. He threw away the Christian idea that want and envy were bad things, and he actually pushed for people to kind of fall into their want and their envy because it pushed them to strive for more. They could see things that they wanted to become or that they wanted to have, and they would strive more for them. He focused on this idea of self-revelation and becoming what one is. It was also during this time that you see Nietzsche's really strong influence in perspectivism, which is a theory that knowledge of a subject is inevitably partial and limited to the individual perspective from which it is viewed. He, during this time, actually bashed a lot of other philosophers. One of the biggest ones was Plato. He said that everything that Plato or any other philosopher said could only be taken to a certain amount of truth because everyone influenced their own truth. So everything was based on your own perspective. One quote that I found during my research was, Nietzsche discovers that one thing is needful for the exemplary human being, to craft an identity from otherwise disassociated events, bringing forth the horizons of one existence. And so he thought people could make their own way and choose how they wanted their life to be. So those were three of Nietzsche's biggest ideas, and they kind of perpetuated and filled out throughout his entire ideas, and you can see bits and pieces of them. Nietzsche had a really strong influence on philosophy. If any of this stuff that we just talked about sounds familiar, we talked about it with with Weber and with Karl Marx. And we see these kind of ideas of making your own way. We even see them today. We don't use Nietzsche's name with them, but in our society, everything is related to your own idea. There's no like objective truth. It just depends on what you want to be true, and how you were raised and how you view things. And so you still see his effects even after his death. I hope this video was helpful in providing a brief summary of Nietzsche's life and legacy.